Welcome, Bronco Nation. My game preview for Boise State versus San Diego State. Boise State coming into this matchup 1-2 versus a 2-2 San Diego State team that opened up the season 2-0 and has since dropped their last two games. Kind of the opposite of Boise State there, opening up the season 0-2 and then winning their last matchup. But it is two programs that have opened up versus a very tough schedule, perhaps the toughest in the Mountain West. Boise State playing two Power 5 teams to start off the bat, and San Diego State, after opening up against a MAC program and an FCS opponent, now losing two games against Power 5 programs. So both of these teams have been tested early, and this is now the conference opener for both of these programs. It's going to be an interesting look at how these teams will fare in the Mountain West Conference now that they are facing perhaps more evenly matched foes coming into this game. So Boise State, San Diego State, Friday, September 22nd at 8:30 p.m. Mountain Central Time, a late night game, so definitely a hard switch from the 10 a.m. kickoff of last Saturday. On Friday, Boise State is favored in this matchup, 68.2% chance of winning, and given a 6.5 points favorites according to Vegas. Now, it is the conference opener for both of these programs. Now, Boise State has not lost a conference opener since 1999. However, this seems to be the season that records are tumbling all over the place. Boise State lost its first home opener versus UCF, which was the first time they'd lost a home opener since 2001. Boise State opened up the season 0-2, which was the first time they'd done that since facing off since 2005. So Boise State has had some records fall by the wayside. This is an important one to keep up because Boise State's number one goal is to win their conference and then a bowl game after that. And getting a win versus San Diego State here on the road, it's not going to be an easy task versus the Aztecs. It never is. It's a rivalry matchup, and we'll talk about that when we get to series history, is going to be incredibly important to setting the tone for the rest of this conference season. Those previous losses are out of conference. They don't affect the team's overall goals. This one is the first step to accomplishing Boise State's number one goal of winning their conference and getting to that Mountain West Championship game. Now, we're going to talk about the series history. We'll talk about key players for Boise State and San Diego State. We'll talk about keys to the game for a Boise State win and a summary overall of the score prediction. Before we get any further in this video, I want each and every one of you to go down in the comments and give me your score prediction, any preliminary thoughts you have on this matchup, but your score prediction, and we'll compare our notes at the end. I love having those discussions with each of you in the comments. Anybody that comments a score prediction will get some form of response from me. I love to have those discussions with each and every one of you. Any San Diego State fans, if you happen to be watching, I doubt it, but if you are happening to be watching, you are welcome to leave a score prediction as well, and we can have a discussion about your prediction for your team here coming into this major matchup. Now, before we get any further, I do want to give a quick shout out to Flying Pie Pizza for contributing to my studio set here with this great glass. This is not the only gift that, or only contribution to my studio that I brought back with me. Brought back a lot of great items from my trip to Boise. Definitely enjoyed it. But big shout out to Flying Pie Pizza on Broadway for contributing to the studio setup. All right, Boise State versus San Diego State. This is a matchup that is a rivalry, and both programs are tied. If there's not a lot of programs out there that Boise State has a tied series history with, well, San Diego State's one of them. Boise State opened up the series in 2011 with a big blowout win. Kellen Moore at the helm, 52-35. But if you thought that was going to be a forecast of future matchups to come, you were dead wrong. 2012, San Diego State rolls into Boise, and in a very tough matchup against a Joe Southwick-led program, Boise State dropped the game by 2 points, 19-21. Incredibly tough, very, very close game. But San Diego State would then go on to win the next matchup as well before Boise State regained control and won the next two. After that, San Diego State taking another two, so you see a pattern here, 2-2-2. And then Boise State winning the last matchup in 2022. So if we're just following the pattern, it's a Boise State win all the way. Of course, there's a lot more things to analyze than simply the pattern of the series history here. But the important thing to note here is that almost every one of these games has been close across the board with both teams swapping paint. Boise State winning the last game in 2022 with a little bit of a larger margin than usual, 35-13. Big help of that was a second half comeback by the Boise State Broncos that saw Dirk Cutter institute that run-heavy offense. So maybe there's a key there for Boise State in this matchup, but these are two different teams. Different offensive coordinator, different quarterback for San Diego State, and different offensive coordinator for Boise State. So this is going to be a key test for both these programs who have have presented different results in different matchups against different levels of foes. San Diego State opening up 2-0, but not looking great in those matchups against lower level programs, Ohio out of the MAC, and then an FCS team, before actually looking pretty good in their two losses versus Power 5 teams. Boise State has had pretty uneven results, 2 losses, which they didn't look great in, and then a win versus North Dakota, which was a big win for them score-wise, margin-wise, but it could have been a lot larger, and there were a lot of mistakes made along the way that need to be corrected against a program like this. So key players to that end, to correcting those mistakes and getting that big win for Boise State here in their conference opener. Key players for Boise State are going to be, number one here is the linebacker, the sophomore who's exploded onto the scene here, Marco Natarani. He only had 3 tackles coming into the matchup versus UCF in his entire career. 2 tackles in 2022, and then 1 tackle versus Washington. And then out of nowhere, he explodes onto the scene and now has 20 tackles. He's number 1 on the team in tackles. He has 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 3 tackles for loss. He has been a dynamite player, a changer on this team that has completely changed the energy level of this Boise State front 7. When we came into the season, Ron Counts and I were talking about the Boise State front 7 and the defense overall, and we were saying who's going to be that star player that steps up for Boise State. There wasn't a lot of people that popped off the board. There were some guys, Ladipo, Dimitri Washington, Thompson. There were some guys that jumped off at you as potential guys that might step up and be, Robinson, not Thompson, that might step off the board and be that guy for Boise State. And those guys have played well. But there wasn't that, DeMarcus Lawrence, Leighton Vander Esch type star take over a game player. And DJ Stram's awesome, but he's a little bit more of a utility. He'll take the guy once he runs past the front 7. He doesn't put up a lot of sacks, a lot of tackles for loss. He's just a great all-around utility player. But there wasn't that star, highlight reel player for Boise State that popped off the board. And we said there's probably someone on the benches that we haven't seen yet who's going to step up into that role. And that has been Marco. Incredible start to the season. He's breathed new life into this defense, and he is only starting to ramp up. 2 games of prolonged playing time, which he's never really experienced in his career, have shown that he is going to be a player that shapes and molds this defense, not just this season, but into the next couple of years for Boise State as well. So he's going to be a key player for Boise State going up against a San Diego State team that's starting to find their groove a little bit. Maiden is playing better. Their running game is starting to improve. The linebacker play for Boise State, and specifically here starting off with Marco, is going to be a major factor for Boise State finding success in this matchup, part of that young group of players that have stepped up for this Boise State team. Second key player for me is going to be Jonah Dalmas. This could be a game that ends up being determined by field goals. Now, you want to hope that it's a large win. But if you look back at the series history, this has been a game that's often come down to the line for Boise State or for San Diego State. And Jonah Dalmas is having an incredible year. 3 of 3 so far. Hasn't been called out to kick a lot, but when he has, it's been from a little ways out there, long range. He's 3 of 3 from 30 plus, and he has a 56-yard field goal that he made versus UCF, which tied the longest field goal ever in Boise State history. And last week, he had a 54 or 55, I think it was 54-yarder that he made that, unfortunately for him, not unfortunately for the team, but unfortunately for him, he was fouled in the process of kicking it. Boise State got a first down, ended up with a touchdown on that drive. So they took the field goal off the board for a foul, but he has been incredible. He's made all the kicks that he's been called on to present for Boise State, and he is showing that he is going to be cementing himself as a top player in Boise State history. I think there will be no doubt by the end of the season that he is the top kicker in Boise State history, and not just statistically, but when you look back on what he did. He is playing to win, and I think this is a game where you might see his leg called on to kick one of those game-winning field goals where he's never truly lined up for a game-winning field goal. This could, or he has, but he's never made one. The only other opportunity was a block versus Oklahoma State. But this could be that chance where he lines up for and makes a game-winning field goal versus San Diego State. Third key player for me is going to be Eric McAllister, the wide receiver for Boise State, that as we thought was going to be that number 1 guy, especially after Caples went out with the injury. And it took him a couple of games, a lot of drops with the rest of the wide receiver core versus Washington. Not as many targets as he would have liked in the second half versus UCF. And a couple of, at least one kind of one-handed, would have been a tough catch drop there for him as well. But versus North Dakota, he finally rose up to be the player that we all know he's capable of being and took over as that number 1 wide receiver. I think there could be no doubt when looking at this roster that he has been established as the number 1 wide receiver threat for Boise State. He had 238 yards and 2 touchdowns on the season, but 143 yards and 2 touchdowns just versus North Dakota. That's the most yards by Boise State wide receiver since Khalil Shakir had 166 yards versus UTEP at the start of 2021, and he's the first wide receiver to go over 100 yards receiving since Khalil Shakir for Boise State. So he's definitely established himself as that number one threat. I would expect them to continue trying to exploit and build on that as the season goes on. The question has to be, who is going to be that number 2, number 3, who lines up next to him or on the other side of the field from him and adds to this Boise State passing game? It's going to be a big question that needs to be answered, and that'll be something we talk about when we get to our keys to the game. So talking about three key players here for San Diego State, because this is a San Diego State team that looked really bad. I mean, they almost lost to Ohio. They would have lost to Ohio if Rourke hadn't been taken out with an injury, and they were within a touchdown of losing to Idaho State. And then they turned things around. They lost to UCLA and Oregon State, but they weren't massive blowouts. And they were right in that Oregon State game right up until the end and had every opportunity to put themselves into that game to win it. So it's definitely a program that is playing down and up to their competition, but also improving as the season goes on. And one of those guys that's been key to that overall improvement is quarterback Jalen Mayden. Very uneven so far. You know, he's only completing 60.3% of his passes, has 4 interceptions, but he also has 701 yards passing. He also 3 touchdown passes, and he's rushed for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is just 2 yards short of being the number one rusher on his team. So he's adding that dual threat package for San Diego State, and Boise State struggles with dual threat guys. You know, Plumlee kind of had his way with Boise State. He didn't rip off a ton of long gainers, but anytime he wanted to pull it and run it, he was getting, 7 yards a clip most of the time. So that's going to be a big one to look at, his legs, but also the fact that he has an arm that can be used in the passing game and against the Boise State secondary that still has some things to figure out and was exposed versus Washington and had some moments versus UCF and definitely struggled with consistency on third downs and longs versus both of those programs, North Dakota and UCF. This is a San Diego State team that might be able to exploit that with their quarterback here, Jalen Mayden. Tight end Mark Redmond's going to be the number one guy for them, going to try and exploit that Boise State secondary. He reminds me a lot of the Colorado State tight end from a couple of years ago. Big, tall guy, their number one threat. 16 receptions, 179 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Like I said, tall, 6'6", 255 pounds. So he puts a lot of weight into that tight end position. And he's a tough guy to stop, even if you know you need to cover him. And again, it's a Boise State secondary that has had trouble, has struggled to line up one-on-one versus guys and stop key players, both versus UCF and versus actually all 3 teams, Washington, UCF, and North Dakota, all had kind of number 1 or number 2 wide receivers that were able to go up against one-on-one matchups or double cover to make plays. And this tight end for San Diego State that's leading their team in receiving is going to be a hard one to stop. Now, turning the defensive side real quick here for San Diego State is going to be their safety, Cedarius Barfield. I think I'm saying that name correct. But he is a great player for them, has had an interception in every single game except versus UCLA, and he had a pick versus Oregon State that was very impressive. Great coverage, great positioning, laid out, got the pick, went up high, and got it over the top of the receiver in a decently thrown ball there by DJ. So this is a guy that could exploit mistakes, and, Taylor Green has been putting some balls into harm's way versus North Dakota. He only had 1 pick. It wasn't really his fault, but he had 2 other plays that should have been picks versus a North Dakota secondary that wasn't able to take advantage of them. You throw balls like that towards this safety, he is going to take advantage in a big way. So Boise State is going to want to make sure that they know where he is on the field and are accounting for him when they start trying to put up some of these deep balls. They're not going to necessarily have that same success like they did against North Dakota if they're not carefully scheming to avoid him, or at least finding ways to get their wide receivers open and throw good passes over the top of this safety defense. All right, so keys to the game for Boise State. Great players for Boise State, great players versus San Diego State. But what does Boise State need to do to put everything together and get this win? Well, number one, and my number one key is the future is now. And I'm talking about the youth on this program. We've talked about Marco here for Boise State, but he's not the only guy. I mean, the youth on this program, these Andy Avalos recruits, are really stepping up in a big way. We didn't see a lot of that young talent taking place versus Washington, but after that game, Boise State really came in and reassessed a lot of things. And part of that was was the players and the personnel. And we started seeing more and more guys getting opportunities versus UCF and then versus North Dakota. On the defense, it's not just Natarani. You also have Simpson, Zion Washington, Ty Bensfield, Jaden Virgin. All these guys have been getting extended playing time, and I know I'm missing a few as well. But Natarani's number 1 on the team in tackle. Simpson's is 6th on the team overall. And the rest of the guys I mentioned have been playing extensively and definitely improving this defense. Boise State on offense is not just the defensive young guys that are stepping up. Of course, you have your young guys that were your established young guys like, Green and Genty. But McAllister is now that number 1 receiver threat after kind of coming on the scene late last season and now has established himself unanimously as the number 1 guy. You also have Madsen, who, Mad Dog Madsen, that has done an incredible job for Boise State, stepping in as that backup player in a way that you just don't expect from a young guy. And then another guy that needs to see more playing time, because we talk about guys that have shown what they're capable of, and Boise State needs to lean into them a little bit heavier. But some of the guys that have shown their capability that deserve some more playing time and some more reps, offensively specifically, is Jean-Bray Dubar. This is a guy that has stepped up as that number 2 running back for Boise State with George Kalani out. I don't know whether or not he's going to be good to go in this game. He hasn't played since the Washington game. So for the meantime, it's been Jean-Bray Dubar and the Ashton Genty show, and we've been getting more and more looks at Jean-Bray Dubar. Now, part of that was the fumble issues from Genty, but this Boise State offense is, with their run, it's a balanced attack with a run focus, which is what we thought we would see coming into the season. We didn't see it versus Washington, but we've now seen it versus UCF and North Dakota, and it's definitely the offense that Bush Hampton is wanting to focus on. Part of the reason he was brought in is because of that offensive focus that we thought we would see with a run-focused offense for Boise State. But with that run-focused offense, you don't just want one back taking the load the whole time. That's how you start seeing guys start getting injured. And it's a Boise State running back room that really can't afford to take any more injuries with 3 backs out already, and you're about to start having to play some wide receivers at running back if you lose one more. So Boise State's running back room has to have that 1-2 punch, not just for the health and safety of the players, but also for the effectiveness of the game plan. You want to keep your guys fresh. You want to keep hitting the defense with the fastest guys available, and you don't want your running backs slowing down throughout the game. Jean-Bray Dubar has speed. He has maneuverability. He has pretty good awareness overall. He's got good eyes, good vision. Of course, he's a true freshman, and of course, he is developing, and I don't think he necessarily has the same build as Ashton Genty, but he's got good speed. He reminds me in some ways of a young pre-injury DJ Harper. He definitely, well, I'm not saying he's take over from Ashton Genty, not saying that at all. Ashton Genty is still the number 1 back. He needs to be worked into this offense a little bit more methodically, I think, a little bit more, not necessarily an even split, but taking some of that load off of Ashton Genty. And say Helani does come back in this game, Jean-Bray Dubar has shown that he deserves to be continuing to take reps and a good chunk of reps for Boise State with what he's been able to put on the field so far. Another guy who's only gotten 1 catch so far, but it was last week versus North Dakota, and the fans went crazy because they want to see him. I don't think I've ever seen a fan base so excited about a player since Taylor Green, really, is Prince Strawn. He came on the field, he had a 17, I think-ish yard catch, back shoulder fade, perfect catch, and then I don't think he came back on. He wasn't targeted the rest of the game. This is a player for Boise State. When you're talking about that number 2 guy to step up, there's a lot of vets on this team that haven't stepped up to be that number 2 guy yet. There's been moments, there's been flashes. Stephon Cobbs has definitely had great moments, a great touchdown on that final drive for Boise State versus UCF. Bowens has had his opportunities in some moments, but Prince Strawn is another tall, fast, McAllister-esque receiver with that. When you're talking about developing the Boise State deep ball, this is a player that could be a big part of that. And so while I'm not necessarily saying that, we aren't seeing what's going on in practice and we haven't seen anything put out on the field yet that said make him the number 2. What I am saying is he needs more reps. He needs more opportunities to shine. He needs more opportunities to explode. And especially when you're talking about the deep ball threat, you need to start seeing him more on the field. So start getting those. So the future's now. Start getting those young guys, the guys that you're already having on defense, keep pushing them. I think that is the way to go. This young defense is really starting to merge and gel and improve as they get on the field to get that experience. And when you're talking about building a team for 2024, because as a group of 5 program, that's what 2023 is. 2024 is when the playoffs are a realistic goal for a group of 5 team. 2023 is just about setting yourself up for that. When you're talking about building a program for 2024, it's all about the youth and starting a program like this with Boise State, young defense, and putting them together and getting them into that team mindset for 2024 is going to be a huge dividends paid forward. Now, like I said, there are some guys that still I think are on are on this defense that we don't even know about. Some young guys that we haven't seen yet who could step forward. And Boise State still needs to keep pulling out those diamonds in the rough. Still keep digging on this bench and on this roster to find those guys that you never thought were going to make these huge improvements, and find those other Marcos. Find those other Ty Bendisfields. Find those other guys, especially in the secondary, where some of the guys that are currently starting for Boise State have been struggling. Find some guys to push them from behind. Find some guys to spell them for a bit. Boise State's secondary, I think, still has some opportunities to pull some guys forward, whether it's, a McCoy or, even a transfer, not necessarily a young guy, but a new guy like Tyus Tolier. There's opportunities to pull some guys forward and see what they have and what they can bring with extended play time for Boise State on this defense. Now, my second key, I'm hyped on the young guys. I absolutely am. But I am by no means saying it's time to bench the vets. My second key is that the vets need to step up. It's time for the Boise State vets on offense and on defense to step up and say, okay, young whippersnappers, you can wait your turn till next year. We're the main show, and we need to prove that. Boise State has had some great guys step up and play well in that veteran unit, and some guys that have played well in spurts but have more to offer, and I think are building. Examples of that are Dimitri Washington, a player for Boise State, was one of my key players of the game last week. Had his first sack of the game season so far. And he has been playing his heart out, playing a huge amount of reps for Boise State, being a very consistent threat, but he hasn't necessarily taken over the game. And I think you've seen him building. I think from Washington to UCF, you saw improvement for this defense overall. But I thought you saw more out of Dimitri Washington. And then versus North Dakota, he started to rumble. And I think you're going to see this team captain really explode in the next couple of weeks. So he's a player for Boise State, a senior that I think is going to start taking over this game. Another guy that's kind of in that realm is Stephon Cobbs. You're talking about Prince Strawn. You're talking about, Cole Wright. You're talking about Ben Ford. Some of the other guys stepping up, trying to push from behind. This is a guy that we thought was going to be the next Khalil Shakir. When Khalil Shakir left, he had been kind of the number 2 behind him, and we thought in 2022 that this was going to be our number 1 wide receiver, and it didn't materialize. This is his opportunity. He's played pretty well overall. He had a deep catch versus Washington. He had the touchdown catch versus UCF. He didn't really have much of an impact last week, but he is a player that has that capability. We've seen it from the beginning. He's a 5th-year senior for Boise State. He has that capability to take over and be that number 2 and to kind of complement more in a slot role what Eric McAllister is bringing in the wideout role. So we really need to see if you're talking about a vet that could step up and be that number 2 and have a huge impact for Boise State, Stephon Cobbs is that guy. Billy Bowens also has that potential as well, but Stephon Cobbs is that senior that has the opportunity to explode for Boise State. Some guys that maybe aren't reaching their potential yet and definitely need to step up because they might be feeling some pressure from behind. You're looking at probably Kaniho here. He's a player that was tested a lot last season and has really struggled coming the stretch here. This is a guy that if he's not careful, there are some young guys on this bench that might step up, and he needs to make sure that he is making a complete turnaround because the opening of the season so far has not been a good one for this young guy, and he needs to step up. I believe he's a junior. He needs to step up and prove that he is one of the veterans on this defense and that he is going to meet the potential that we saw in his freshman season that hasn't necessarily materialized in his sophomore and now junior year. So there's a couple guys on this roster. Riley Smith has been a little bit underutilized. I don't know if that's the offensive scheme or if it's just inability to find him or if he's just not getting out there and getting open. I know when you saw Maddox in the game throwing, he was actually a little bit more efficient at finding Riley Smith. So again, I'm not sure if it's a play calling or if it's a player issue. But that's another guy, a vet on this unit that 6th-year guy came back for Boise State, needs to step up or at least have the offense maybe mold a little bit to that tight end focus. He has more to offer than what is currently being put on the field right now. So the vets, they need to take control. They need to take control of this game and of this season and step up and be that team now, create that legacy and prove that they, the time for the young guys is coming, but right now this is the time for the vets. So the young guys need to keep pushing. The future for them, a lot of those guys is popping up now, but a lot of these vets still need to prove that they have more to offer for this Boise State team and to show the capabilities and the potential that we've seen in them all along. Third key of the game here, and it's going to be a little more focused here, is going to be Green needs to stop forcing the ball. Just plain and simple. He has really kind of moved backwards a little bit into some of those tendencies that he was showing last season that I thought he had developed well throughout the season and started showing those less, really kind of pushed more into them this year. A lot of times, he doesn't really seem to be getting his feet set, so some fundamental issues there. But the biggest issue overall is he's forcing the ball into positions that it shouldn't be. Near picks, actual picks, key ones like the pick versus UCF on the rollout, that there was 3 defenders there, and he drastically underthrew it, but it was a questionable decision to throw the ball anyway. It had to have been a pretty perfect pass, and it wasn't to get that ball there in the first place. I think part of the issue that we're seeing from Green is he has some opportunities where he could run the ball. And remember, last season, that's what he did. If the play wasn't there, he was running that ball. And there were some opportunities where he could have thrown the ball, and he didn't, and that's what you see out of young, mobile quarterbacks is the emphasis on the running game. And then you coaches have to take them aside and say, look, the feet are great, but you're a quarterback. Use that arm. And they have to kind of pull them back a little bit and change that mindset. The issue is, I think Taylor Green has changed the mindset too much. I think that he's now at a point where he'll be running and he has opportunity to pick up 5, 6, maybe more yards on the ground, but he keeps looking for the pass, which is great. You want to run to throw, run to set up the throw. You don't want to just be a running back out there. But he keeps looking for the pass beyond the point that you should make that decision, and then he makes the decision to throw it into a position that shouldn't ever have been put in the first place. Part of that is I think he's being forced into the pocket more than he should be. I think that's a little bit of a scheme issue because when you're being forced in the pocket there and the pocket's collapsing on you, don't really have the opportunity to run. We need to see more rollouts for him where he has the option to run or pass, but we also need to see a little bit more of a return to those roots for him where he is making those quicker decisions, looking at what's open. If you don't have the throw available to you, and if it's not at this point, if it's not a perfect pass opportunity, run the ball. You still got accuracy issues that you need to deal with and improve on. You've still got some decision makings you need to deal with and improve on. So if I was coaching Taylor Green, I'd be telling him if the pass is there and you know it's there and the guy is wide open, or you can fit it in, you have that confidence, throw the ball. Otherwise, if it's a 50-50 or even a 60-40 and you have an opportunity to pick up 4 or 5 yards, just run the ball and see what you can get. Because that right now is where we got to move backwards a little bit to more of that running game while we improve the wide receiver core. We improve the opportunities for the quarterback to get that ball out there to the wide receivers with his own accuracy and the wide receiver's ability to get open. Improve those aspects and then maybe push more to start pushing those balls into some positions where you know you can get it there, but it's going to be a little bit of a tighter throw. Because what we've seen so far is a lot of miscues and a lot of mistakes, a lot of unforced errors where Taylor Green is not making the right decision and drastically underutilizing, which is perhaps potentially his best skill, which is his legs. Those definitely need to be a bigger factor for this offense. More designed runs for the quarterback is definitely a key, but him using his legs in the passing game versus forcing balls into positions that he should never have thrown in the first place is going to be a major priority versus a San Diego State defense that is opportunistic, has some good defensive backs there, especially in secondary, a safety we've pointed out, and some other guys we didn't even talk about that are capable of taking over and making big plays, big interceptions, that if you force balls into positions that North Dakota dropped, San Diego State is not going to be dropping those balls, and it's going to be a major swing versus San Diego State team at home. You don't want to be giving them any chance for momentum or opportunities in a rivalry matchup. So 3 keys: future is now, vets step up, Green stop forcing the ball. Summary overall, like I said, San Diego State lost to 2 teams. Won against 2 programs, Ohio and Idaho State, but didn't look great. But they've since stepped up and been playing better. So what we saw at San Diego State the first couple of games, I don't think is actually reflective of where they're at now. They've seemed to have found their running game. Some compliments to Maiden here. Maiden seems to be playing a lot better, definitely using his legs more effectively. And overall, the San Diego State defense definitely seems to be trending in the right direction as well. And they've been playing pretty well throughout the season anyway. Versus Ohio, they were pretty good overall. Ohio didn't really have an offense. But they played really well versus Oregon State. It wasn't until late that Oregon State was able to pull away. So Boise State's going to make sure that is going to need to make sure that they are focused. They're also going to need to make sure that they can prove to this fan base and to the team that North Dakota was not a fluke. That new and improved pass rush, which, like I said in my last video, it looked like they were using some different schemes, some different stunts, definitely putting forward a different face. I don't think it was just the FBS versus FCS matchup there. I really think Boise State was doing something different there, some personnel changes and some different stunts to give their defensive blitz a little bit more pressure, a little bit more oomph, and actually having a bigger impact. But they need to prove that that wasn't just the FCS factor. That wasn't a fluke. They need to prove that the ability of wide receivers to get open, which we really saw versus North Dakota, really for the first time, was not a fluke. That this Boise State offense, this creativity, Boise State won last week, and that was great. But the best thing about it was that they looked like Boise State doing it. They had trick plays. They had shifts. They had motions. They had mixed offense. They had the deep ball. They looked like Boise State offense that we really haven't seen out of them for a while. They looked like Boise State winning that game. They need to do that again versus San Diego State. They need to prove that that wasn't a fluke, that they can do those same techniques, those same tactics, same Boise State traditionalism versus the San Diego State team. And again, the biggest thing is the wide receivers being able to get open and showing that the deep ball is an actual effective part of this offense. So Boise State seems to have found their identity. They are improving. They've been improving every single week. I thought the offense has gotten much better every single week. And what we saw versus San Diego State, versus North Dakota, you take away the miscues that Boise State has, and they win that game by 4 or 5 touchdowns versus just winning it by 3 scores. So Boise State, they need to take away their own miscues, but their offense seems to be clicking at a higher rate. Ashton Jeanty is exploding. The passing game is improving. Boise State is moving in the right direction offensively. Their defense is getting better, especially their front seven. It is going to be a San Diego State program that's going to test that middle run game that Boise State has really struggled to stop. So they're going to really need to make sure that they've stepped up their program there defensively, because there's going to be some opportunities for San Diego State to make some big plays. But San Diego State struggles against the run. Struggles against the pass. They're pretty good against run, 144.5 yards per game, but against the pass, they've given up 295.3 points per game. Passing yards per game, 295.3 passing yards per game. So there's going to be some opportunities there for this passing game that has started to improve for McAllister and company to make some big plays and some big opportunities for Boise State. And I think this running game is probably one of the best running games that San Diego State has faced, one of the best running units that San Diego State has faced. So they're going to be pressure on that front, and there's going to be opportunities for the passing game. You watch the Oregon State game, there were a lot of gash plays, and Boise State does great at the gash plays. They have some really nice long break-off runs that I think they're going to be able to exploit versus San Diego State, and I think the opportunities for the passing game are going to open up versus this San Diego State secondary, though they do have to be careful because they do have some ball hawks back there. So Boise State, I think that they are improving. I think that they're a good team. I really do. I think that the 2 teams they lost to start the season are great programs, especially Washington, and they could have won that UCF game, just went 50-50 down the wire with the field goal, and they showed dramatic improvement versus North Dakota. I think what you're going to see out of this Boise State versus San Diego State program is going to be a completely changed, revamped offense that is clicking, is moving much more effectively and efficiently, and is showing those Boise State type plays that we saw start to rise up versus North Dakota. It's also going to be a San Diego State team that's going to challenge this Boise State secondary and also challenge their ability to stop the run game. I don't think that this San Diego State program has fully meshed. I think that they're still struggling to get to their full potential. I think Boise State's getting to a point where they're starting to reach their full potential. So I think Boise State will win this game, but it's going to be close. I could see a 14-point plus win by Boise State. I'm not predicting that, but if Boise State can stop the running game for San Diego State, stop the quarterback, and not have miscues on offense, not have turnovers, not have, by either running backs or quarterbacks, and really step up and improve their game overall offensively, I could see a major improvement by this Boise State offense and a 14-point plus win. What I'm actually predicting is a much closer game, 31-24 for Boise State. Boise State wins, but only by a touchdown, with a lot of opportunities for San Diego State to be in and hang around in this game late. It's going to be a very tough test, first conference test, and Boise State looking to avoid its first conference opener loss since 1999. Thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe. As always,